Okay, we're recording. Good morning, and thank you for joining the second AB 691 webinar. Please mute your computers or phones to avoid background noise, as we are recording this webinar and will post the recording and today's slides on our AB 691 webpage in the next week. We will be sure to send out a link once it's posted. My name is Flower Moy, and I'm a Sea Grant Fellow with the State Controller's Office. I am joined by three of my colleagues: Maren Farnham, an environmental scientist at the Commission; Sherry Pemberton, Chief of External Affairs and Legislative Liaison at the Commission; and Abby Newman, a Sea Grant Fellow at the Commission. This second informational webinar was created in response to your feedback with the purpose of assisting the estimation of financial costs of sea level rise impacts to public trust resources. We will discuss ecosystem services and their benefits, which can be incorporated into your financial cost estimates of the value of public trust resources, like beaches and wetlands. By assessing these resources for their market and non-market values, you will get a more accurate estimate of the risk associated with loss or damage to those resources, as well as the benefits you may derive from ensuring their protection and resiliency to sea level rise. Ecosystem services and non-market values can also be used in benefit cost analyses when choosing amongst adaptation strategies. Green and natural infrastructure for flood management and protection can be cost-effective strategies that afford multiple benefits beyond their primary function. Our team is excited to host Maya Kocian, Program Director for Ecosystem Services Valuation and Senior Economist at Earth Economics. Maya oversees organization-wide project delivery and has spent over a decade creating and applying real solutions to conservation challenges. Maya's work in valuing natural capital informed legal cases in Costa Rica, supported Alaska's largest recreation bond, and justified the nomination of a national marine sanctuary. A few announcements before we get started. There will be time for questions at the end of the webinar. You can submit your questions in the chat box to the right-hand side of the screen at any time during the presentation. We'll answer them in the order they were received. For today's webinar, Maya will present natural capital in California ports and harbors. Then Maren will walk you through some additional resources, and we'll finish with questions. We will follow up this webinar with a feedback survey, additional responses to any questions we did not have time to answer today, and more resources to aid in the development of your assessments. And with that, I'll let Maya take it from here.
Okay, thank you very much, Flower. Just a quick sound check before we advance to the next slide. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah, it sounds good. Thank you.
Great. Well, welcome everyone and happy Thursday. It is my pleasure to share with you an overview of natural capital and ecosystem services valuation. Very quickly, I'll give a background on where I work and go over our approach in applying ecological economics. If we advance to the next slide, I'll just kind of give an overview of kind of the concepts that we apply at Earth Economics, how we go about valuing ecosystem services, and then how ecosystem service valuations are used and who uses them. And then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. So Earth Economics, founded in 1998, is an organization based in Tacoma, Washington. Simply put, we quantify and value the benefits nature provides. We collaborate with an extensive network of regional, national, and international partners. Together, we incorporate scientific data and best economic practices to take nature into account. And our next slide is our approach in applying ecological economics. We take a three-pronged approach to our work in order to maximize our impact. I would say most of our projects include some element of each of these components, and the project design generally is flexible, scalable, and customizable to the needs of the project or partner or partners. So for the first column, raising awareness can be in the form of a presentation like this one, or a workshop or panel discussion at a conference, and really just sharing the general concepts and principles of ecological economics. And then place-based analysis of ecosystem services. Here is where we use GIS, geographic information systems, to conduct ecosystem services valuations. And then policy and finance strategies. This is really where we identify funding mechanisms for natural capital, and we're working with agencies to incorporate ecosystem services into their policies. Next, I'm going to go over a few basic definitions. Now, some of you, if not most of you, already know the basics, especially since part of the AB 691 assessment criteria includes non-market values of ecosystem services of your natural capital assets that could be impacted by climate change and sea level rise. But I do find it helpful to briefly distinguish natural capital and ecosystem services, since I have seen and heard people use the terms interchangeably when they really are two different things. Natural capital refers to all of the natural resources or naturally occurring assets, such as wetlands, forest, and seagrasses. While ecosystem services, on the next slide, are the many benefits such as water supply, carbon sequestration, and flood risk reduction that ecosystems provide to people. So in other words, the graphic in the next slide really kind of shows how the two differ. So this graphic illustrates how natural capital provides these quantifiable benefits. A forest is a natural capital asset. It's home to a variety of ecosystems that each performs a set of ecosystem functions, and those functions provide valuable services to surrounding communities. For example, water capture and storage is a function of forest ecosystems. And this is simply part of what the ecosystem naturally does. We are describing a complex system in a simplistic model here, but I think it does a good job in showing how ecosystem goods and services like reduced flood risk derives from natural capital, from the natural capital asset like a forest. So defining ecosystem function, really it's the capacity of natural processes and components to provide these different goods and services. So think of it as a kind of a stock and flow, where your factory is your forest, that's your natural capital, that's your factory, and the products coming out of your factory are the goods and services, the ecosystem goods and services. So that's kind of another way in kind of distinguishing natural capital from ecosystem goods and services. So I just shared one example. Flood risk reduction is just one of different types of ecosystem services. At Earth Economics, we look at 21 general types of goods and services. These are a few examples here that we quickly identified that where ports and harbors could potentially benefit from their coastal natural capital assets. All right, and next, so, we understand industry and ecology frequently exist in a state of give and take. We gain some services at the loss of others. For example, while we gain enormous economic benefits from shipping and trade, we could lose valuable storm buffering and resilience services. But we need both. We do need both built capital and natural capital. And it is crucial to measure and consider the values of each in order to maximize value and minimize losses. So it's about finding a balance between all types of capital, built capital, natural capital. There's even, financial capital, of course, and then also lesser known types like human capital and social capital. So next, now I'm going to go into how economists value ecosystem services. Valuation is an economic process which assigns a value to a specific ecosystem. Now, there are market values which are easy to identify. We can simply look at prices to determine value for certain goods and services. However, what happens when there's no market? So, in the next slide, how do we determine value when there's simply, there's no market for flood risk reduction, for example? Economics is a social science, so we spend a lot of time analyzing people's decisions. That often involves observing markets. But when there is no market for a good or service, like clean air or water, we need to find other ways to quantify them. So one way is stated preference. Sometimes the only way to know what something is worth is to people is to ask them, using carefully designed surveys and employing rigorous controls and standards to reduce bias. So stated preference methods do exactly that. And a few examples include contingent valuation and contingent choice. So people may be hesitant to say what they truly think, or they may exaggerate. So methods like these eliminate a good deal of that by requiring respondents to select from predetermined values or rank different predetermined options rather than just saying whatever value they want. And revealed preference studies look at how people are actually spending their money on goods and services that are closely related to environmental quality and ecosystem services. Because these studies are observing behaviors that have already occurred, they are not subject to the same types of bias as stated preferences studies. So two examples include hedonic and travel cost. So if people value healthy forests or clean air, it stands to reason that they would pay more to live near those things. With hedonic housing price analysis, economists can analyze the effects of specific environmental qualities on housing prices. Using statistical modeling, we can isolate how much of a house's total sale price is attributed to, say, the fourth bedroom, the pool out back, or the beautiful new park down the street. And then for travel cost, similarly, if people value wildlife, beautiful landscapes, and outdoor recreation, we would expect them to spend money to see and do those things. So travel cost studies analyze how much money people are spending on trips to places like national parks and recreation areas, so we can understand how much the public is willing to pay to experience these things. So those were a few examples of primary methods in valuing ecosystem services. Now the benefit transfer method is more of a secondary method where it's broadly defined as the use of existing data or information in settings other than for what it was originally collected for. This method is a validated, well-established approach for indirectly estimating the value of ecological goods or services. This method can generate reasonable ecosystem services estimates quickly and at a fraction of the cost, rather than doing a primary study for each ecosystem service. So, for example, one ecosystem service primary valuation could cost, maybe this is the middle or low end, but $50,000. And if you wanted to look at, 21 different different types of ecosystem services for one specific location and one land cover type, that could potentially be, $1,050,000 assessment for one land cover type. So really, BTM is a practical method for assessing a wide range of ecosystem benefits and multiple benefits in a given area. So kind of the best practices in doing a benefit transfer is, one, look at similar land cover types, similar climates and demographics. Also looking at different water types. Are we talking about saline, brackish, freshwater, and elevation? Are we looking at lowland or alpine? And then also, proximity attributes. Is the location, within a shoreline, or is it in the upper watershed? So there's a few different criteria that economists can look at to determine whether a value is appropriate to transfer. And this example is just I'm not sure if we used exactly that for the Columbia River Basin, but we did a report for the Columbia River Basin that was released last year. So a snapshot of an internal tool that we use at Earth Economics. We developed this. It's basically a database of primary values and secondary values of different ecosystem services, and it allows us to filter by some of the criteria that I mentioned, different attributes, different ecosystem types, and also, making sure the original study valuation method was sound. And so we currently have 4,000 values in our toolkit, 2,000 of which have been verified by Earth Economics, and also there's many that have been rejected. So we do go through a rigorous process to make sure our values are rigorous for public use. All right, so that was kind of a, benefit transfer method is, again, one way to value your ecosystem services and get an annual value. Now, if you want to calculate your natural capital asset valuation, what you can do is first get your annual ecosystem services value, say using the benefit transfer method. And then there's two important things to determine when calculating your asset value. One is determining the lifespan or period of time you want to look at. So are you wanting to look at a 50-year period or a 100-year period? Working with some tribes, they want to consider how their decisions will affect descendants 7 generations into the future. So sometimes we look at 140 years into the future. And then the second important key to look at in calculating your asset valuation is the discount rate. Now, there is no agreed upon discount rate for natural capital. I'm not entirely sure there's an agreed upon discount rate for other industries as well, but there are ranges. And we recommend using the Water Resources Council rules and regulations rates certified by the U.S. Department of the Treasury for water-based projects. And that changes year to year. And for 2018, it is currently at 2.75%. All right, and then just to quickly wrap up on benefit transfer, benefit transfer method is not perfect, but the alternative is valuing nature at 0, which we know is not only untrue, but also leads to bad investment decisions that fail to properly protect a lot of our natural assets. And this method involves estimating the natural capital value of a specific region or site by transferring data from existing studies in other areas that have similar attributes. So another way to think about benefit transfer method is think of a house appraisal where basically values are assigned to individual assets based on condition and market factors. Very similar to how we value ecosystem services per land cover type. All right, well, let's move on to the next section of my presentation. It's basically seeing, well, who uses these benefit transfer method values and why are they using them? So I'm going to go over a few examples, some recent and some from actually 10 years ago, but I think this will be a useful way to show how cities and agencies, utilities are using ecosystem services in their work. So this project was actually from this summer. Earth Economics is a part of the platform partnership program at 100 Resilient Cities. It's a program pioneered by the Rockefeller Foundation. And their goal is basically to support cities around the world become more resilient to the physical, social, and economic challenges that are growing. And one of the cities is Panama City. It's one of Latin America's fastest growing populations. And we conducted a rapid valuation for them for the cities surrounding natural capital. And that includes mangroves, forests, and ag land. And we looked at 11 ecosystem services. They provided the GIS information to us directly, and the results came out to be $1.6 billion each year in critical ecosystem services. And ultimately those values were included in the city's official resilience strategy that they just released about a month ago. Okay, and then next, it's closely related to access to disaster funding. In 2013, Rim Fire burned over 256,000 acres of land in California. We conducted a rapid assessment. Again, thanks to benefit transfer method, we wouldn't be able to do this using only primary valuation methods. By the request of the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, while the fire was still burning. We were able to complete it in less than 60 days, and the valuation showed that the ecosystem services lost as a result of the fire were well over 110 million in addition to property value damages and the cost of fighting the fire itself. So the report provided critical evidence to support Governor Brown's successful appeal package to the president in declaring the fire a major disaster. And I will also add that following that project, we partnered with FEMA and expanded their benefit cost analysis tool to include ecosystem services and the specific values for disaster recovery and mitigation. So now nature is better valued in their decision making. And so flood, drought, and fire mitigation projects can now all include natural capital in their benefit cost analysis, opening up much needed funding for communities to both recover from disasters and to increase resilience through restoration. And another example in California, we partnered with the Santa Clara County Open Space Authority. We did an analysis again with using unit benefit transfer provided by and GIS information provided by Santa Clara County Open Space Authority. The report Healthy Lands and Healthy Economies estimates that Santa Clara County's natural capital provides up to $3.9 billion in benefits to people and the local economy every year. And in 2014, Santa Clara County residents voted in favor of a bond issue called Measure Q. That is bringing an estimated $120 million for open space protection between 2015 and 2030. And the executive director of the Open Space Authority stated that this report was critical to the passage in terms of messaging of the value of the open space there. All right, and now I'm going to go over an example near Seattle. This is a case study that kind of shows from the very beginning to completion, and I'm going to go over a few steps that we took in going about this analysis. So Thornton Creek is an urban stream in Northgate, Seattle, and if we go to the next slide, you can kind of see exactly where, well, you can get a rough idea of where the location I'm talking about is located. Well, it's in Washington State and northeast of Seattle. And this area used to be a wetland, but now there's housing, a community center, and quite a few roads in the area. And so they flood often. And if you go to the next slide, it'll show kind of an image that was a common occurrence. And so Seattle Public Utilities decided that they didn't want to continue with the business as usual option. So they looked at different design options. They had two that they were considering. And again, the base case being just replace the culvert as like they normally have in the past. The cost would be fairly low, but then they wanted to explore these additional options where one, construct a confluence floodplain, or two, which would be more costly, replace the culvert, widen it, and allow for more habitat for salmon, coho, and Chinook specifically, along with the construct of the confluence floodplain. So this table is a snapshot directly from the BCA, that's the benefit cost analysis tool assessment that Seattle Public Utilities did. And basically, you look at the first column, they identified the different cover types under kind of the business as usual case, the base case. So the stream channel 0.11 acres, grass would be 2.52, but there would be no wetlands restored or riparian forest. Whereas if you look at option 1 and 2, there's the fifth column are the proposed design for this area, and both option 1 and 2 would have similar acres, except one would have slightly more salmon habitat. So we basically provided the ecosystem services value. So what you're looking at, the low and the high, we typically do provide a range. This was done over 10 years ago, so we are always working on narrowing our ranges, but basically this was looking at habitat, flood risk reduction, and carbon sequestration and recreation, and figured out, well, how can we integrate this into a benefit cost analysis tool? At the time, this had never been done before, to our knowledge, integrating ecosystem service values into a benefit cost analysis. At least it hasn't been done for Seattle Public Utilities. So in the next slide, you'll kind of see the three options, even though it says option 1 and 2. It's the base case is an option. Basically going about as business as usual is an option, and the cost was roughly, I think, $38,000. So it certainly would be the cheaper option. But again, the community was tired of getting flooded. Street closures was an issue, and also salmon habitats. Salmon are very important to our cultural identity, so we wanted to include more benefits. And even though the costs for both option 1 and option 2 would be higher, the question is the question that the economist and the biologist and the decision makers at SPU wanted to know, which one should we go for, option 1 or option 2. So if you go to the next slide, we can see the ecosystem service benefits, that table I showed you earlier. The green area is basically the added value benefits that these different options provide. So SPU already had the O&M reduction costs as a benefit, and they also had some flood reduction values that they applied. But when you add the ecosystem services, your benefits increase significantly. So if you actually go to the next slide, we compared the benefits and the costs, and actually we simplified this visual in the next slide. So for the desired option, which includes salmon habitat, flood reduction, and recreation opportunities, the numbers did not pencil out if you exclude the ecosystem benefits from that desired option 2 example. The cost would have been 5.4 million roughly, and just looking at O&M costs would be 3.6 million. When ecosystem services are included into the project's benefit cost analysis, the associated benefits are increased up to an additional 3.2 million. So Earth Economics provided the values to Seattle Public Utilities. They incorporated into their benefit cost analysis, and the final report was presented to the Asset Management Committee at Seattle Public Utilities, which is the decision-making body of executives at the utility. And on exactly October 20th, 2010, the project was approved to move forward. The second option, the desired one, where they include more benefits, especially for salmon habitat and widening the culvert. So, green, and also recently, we've had heavy rainfall that previously would have flooded homes, did not cause flooding. So it further demonstrates, the value of this green infrastructure project. We see that green, or natural infrastructure is another way to describe it, is an underutilized option. And I'll just do a little plug for a project that we're doing right now. We're putting together a report working to identify what the barriers are to agencies in implementing natural infrastructure. Because there was a report that was just released this week from Canada, commissioned by the Insurance Bureau of Canada, where they wanted to look at Canada's most expensive and extensive problem, and that's flooding, and come up with the most cost-effective mitigation measures. Well, the study, which was released on Tuesday, acknowledges that to combat Canada's biggest problem of flooding due to heavier than average rainfall and sea level rise, higher dikes, diversion of channels, dams, and better wastewater and sewage treatment plants are needed. But it concluded that in many places, restoring shorelines, riverbeds, and wetlands is both cheaper and can be more beneficial. So our goal is to incorporate economics to help agencies that want to incorporate green infrastructure in their work, to help really justify these nature-based solutions. And with that, if there is interest to connect with Earth Economics for your project needs, please feel free to contact us either through our website or directly to me. But most of all, I hope this webinar will inspire some conversations to discuss projects that might benefit from ecosystem services valuations now or in the future. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Maya. We really appreciate that great overview, and also you supplying us with some examples of where green or natural infrastructure can be employed, the benefits that can be derived from those ecosystem services that might come along with those types of adaptation approaches. And just to follow up, I wanted to bring everyone's attention to some additional tools and resources. Some of these are on our AB 691 website already, and those that are not already there will be added a little later today. But there are some, in addition to the types of resources that Earth Economist can provide and that Maya talked about, there's some additional resources out there that can help you to understand more about the values of the public trust or natural capital resources that might be within your granted lands area. At the National Ocean Economics Program website, they have, and this link will take you directly to this section of their website. They have a whole web page and section devoted to non-market valuation estimates, studies for resources, as well as a pretty good description of different methodology types that you can use. And they do come along with, a range of investment or resources that are needed, but there are also some of these methodologies, including benefit transfer, that can be less resource intensive than others. Another great tool to use, which Maya mentioned is more recent, is the FEMA benefit cost analysis tool that now incorporates ecosystem services. Some of you may be, in addition to developing your AB 691 sea level rise assessment, you may also be working on updating or creating local hazard mitigation plans for FEMA and Cal OES for hazard planning in your local jurisdiction. And this benefit cost analysis tool can help you factor in some of those values from ecosystem services to both assess the level of hazard and risk to the assets in your area, as well as adding in those ecosystem services values that would augment the amount of benefit that you might get from a natural or green infrastructure solution option. And this includes a calculator. I also just want to note that earlier this year, they also released a version of this fully translated into Spanish, which might be of use for some of our areas. We also have some additional references here that are really, really helpful. So one that's already been on our website is from NOAA, What Will Adaptation Cost? An Economic Framework for Coastal Infrastructure. And this takes you through fully described sort of methodology that can be applied at the local or regional scale. And so next I want to bring your attention to an example from Southern California, and that some of you here on the line with us today may have been involved in developing. This was developed by Nexus Planning in the San Diego region, and it's called Comparing Sea Level Rise Adaptation Strategies in San Diego, an application of the NOAA Economic Framework. So that's taking the resource that's directly above it and bringing it down to the local scale with some real practical applications for choosing different adaptation strategies. The last two case studies of natural shoreline infrastructure in coastal California was released right at the end of last year, and that's going to bring you through some examples from coastal areas of projects that have already been implemented. And then the last resource I want to mention, and yet there are still many more, and we'll continue to add to our website. This was just released a few weeks ago. It's called Paying It Forward, the Path Towards Climate-Safe Infrastructure in California. And this gives a very detailed look at costs and benefits of different types of infrastructure, as well as building standards and technical specifications that will be necessary to incorporate and use when considering the construction of some of these alternative to more conventional infrastructure types that you might be already familiar with using or already have in your granted lands for flood control and shoreline protection. So these are just some of the resources. In the interest of time, I'm going to not go into more detail right now about any number of these, but we would like to hear from you if you have any questions. And there might even be some folks on the line who have already begun this part of their AB 691 assessment or have some experience or background in this type of valuation. And so we'll do our best to answer your questions, but we'll also, we'd like to give the opportunity for any of you yourselves who have more experience with these types of exercises to share with your fellow grantees a little bit more about your experiences. So as Flower mentioned earlier, we've got the chat box function that you can use to write in questions. You may also just unmute yourself and ask a question directly through audio. And I believe that Maya is still on the line with us as well, and she might be able to assist in any questions that you have. Just take a moment. Hi there, do you have a question? Oh, so we have one question. Is Earth Economics going to provide TA to individual communities?
Technical assistance.
Oh, okay, technical assistance. Well, thanks for asking that question. Any of the local jurisdictions who are on the line who would like to learn more about Earth Economic Services can certainly get in touch with Maya directly, or we'll also be providing their website that you can go to directly to look at some of their resources and services. Today, they were doing us just a public service by helping provide information for this webinar. And I do have some free resources on their website, particularly lots of their reports that really show some great detailed case studies. But I think that they've assisted us today, and if you'd like to learn more about their services, you can contact Maya directly. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. We also have our contact information here, and please feel free to reach out to any of us at any time to follow up. Again, we'll also be reaching back out to you with some follow-up for your feedback and all these resources. But we just wanted to give you a reminder there that we're also available to assist you as we can, and we can also connect you with some additional places. The deadline for AB 691 submissions is July 1st, 2019. So it's a little less than a year away. The legislation was enacted in 2013. So we really do want to do as much as we can to help you make it to the submission deadline. And we're happy to work with you on an individual basis to assist you to get there. Also, I should mention that some grantees have already submitted their assessments. We make those available online as we review them, and we'll continue to do that throughout the year ahead of the submission deadline. And when they are all submitted, they will all be and reviewed. They'll be posted online on our website. And folks, we know that we gave you a lot of information today, so it's okay if you need some time to mull it over. I think we'll just stay on the line here for a few more minutes if there's any additional questions. And if not, please feel free to reach out to us following the webinar as questions or concerns arise. Okay, well, seeing as we don't have any more questions at this time, we'd just like to take the opportunity to thank Maya Kocian once again from Earth Economics and remind you that we'll be following up with some materials and encourage you to reach out to us at any time with additional questions or assistance. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Flower. Great.